The words didn't just land, they echoed. Across the table, off the walls, through the clinking glasses and polite dinner chatter that had been pretending to exist just seconds earlier. And then came the laughter. Not loud at first, just a few amused exhales. A smirk from Lila. A quiet chuckle from Dad like he didn't want to be involved but didn't want to stand out either. And then Diane, my mother, leaned back in her chair, completely satisfied with herself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Like she just said something clever. Like she hadn't just cut straight through me in front of everyone. So let me ask you something. What would you have done? Would you argue? Defend yourself? Storm out? Yeah, that's what they expected. But I didn't do any of that. I just sat there, still, quiet, watching, because the truth is, I already knew something they didn't, and in about 10 seconds, everything in that room was going to change. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and red wine. Diane always made sure things looked perfect when guests were over, even when the guests were just family, especially then, because appearances mattered more than anything to her. Lila sat to my right, glowing in that effortless way she always had. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect life. Her fiancé, Ryan, sat beside her, smiling politely, though his eyes kept flicking between people like he was trying to read something under the surface. Smart guy. He was the only one who noticed I hadn't reacted. Dad sat across from me, unfocused a little too hard on cutting his food. Avoidance, that was his specialty. And then there was Diane, still watching me, waiting for me to crack. Well, she pressed, tilting her head slightly. Nothing to say? I lifted my gaze to meet hers, calm, steady. No, I said simply. That annoyed her more than anything else could have, because silence doesn't give someone control, it takes it. Here's what they thought they knew. I was 24, recently divorced, back living on my own after what they called a failed marriage. And Daniel? Oh, Daniel was charming, successful, put together, the kind of man my mother loved to show off, which meant if the marriage ended, it had to be my fault, right? That was the story they'd already decided on. The only problem? It wasn't the real one. You know, Lila chimed in, and her voice soft but edged with something sharper underneath. Relationships take effort from both people. There it was, the subtle dig wrapped in fake concern. I turned slightly toward her, held her gaze just a second too long. Yeah, I said quietly. They do. Ryan shifted in his seat. He felt it too now, the tension, the imbalance. Something wasn't lining up. Under the table, my fingers brushed against the edge of my bag. The leather was worn, familiar. Inside it was the reason I hadn't said a word, the reason I didn't need to defend myself, the reason this entire conversation was already over. They just didn't know it yet. Diane let out a small laugh again, shaking her head. I just don't understand how you managed to ruin good things, Emily. Honestly. Ruin, that word. Funny, isn't it? That because sometimes what looks like ruin from the outside is actually survival. I exhaled slowly. Then, without another word, I reached down, slid my hand into my bag, and pulled something out, wrapped carefully in an old faded cloth. I placed it on the table, right between the wine glasses, right where everyone could see it. The room shifted, not dramatically, just enough, because confusion is quiet at first. Diane raised an eyebrow. What is that supposed to be? I met her eyes again. This time, there was something different behind mine. Not anger, not embarrassment, something colder. Go ahead, I said. Open it. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she reached forward and pulled back the cloth. And the moment her eyes landed on what was inside, her smile didn't fade slowly. It disappeared, instantly. Well, it started with silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the comfortable kind where two people can exist in the same space without needing to fill it. No. This silence felt wrong, heavy, like something was sitting between us at the dinner table, invisible but impossible to ignore. So let me ask you, have you ever sat across from someone you love and realized you might not actually know them at all? When I met Daniel Reeves, I was 21. He was 29. Confident, polished, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say and when to say it. He noticed things, small things, the kind that make you feel seen. And for someone like me, that mattered. Because growing up in my house, being seen wasn't guaranteed. Lila got attention for being perfect. I got comparisons. So when Daniel came along, it felt like I had finally done something right. And Diane, oh, she loved him. Now this, she had said the first time she met him, is a man with direction. Translation? Finally, Emily didn't mess up. The first year of our marriage looked exactly how it was supposed to. Dinners out, weekend trips, photos that made everything look effortless. But here's the thing about pictures. They don't capture what happens in between. It started small. Daniel working late more often, then coming home distracted, then not really coming home at all, at least not mentally. I'd ask about his day. He'd give short answers. I'd try to talk more. He'd check his phone. And that phone, it became a pattern. Always face down, always within reach, always locked. At first, I told myself I was overthinking, because that's what you do, right? You rationalize, you adjust, you try harder. Especially when everyone around you is already waiting for you to fail. So I did everything I could. Cooked more, planned things, adjusted my schedule around his. Even apologized, sometimes without knowing what I was apologizing for. And every time I tried, he pulled just a little further away. Not dramatically, just enough to make you question yourself instead of them. And then there was my mother's voice in the background. You have to keep a man interested, Emily. Don't be difficult. Men don't like pressure. It got into my head. Made me wonder if the distance was my fault, if I was the problem. But then, one night changed everything. It was late, past midnight. I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet again. So I got up, walked toward the kitchen, and that's when I heard it. Daniel's voice. Low and careful, coming from the living room. I stopped, didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. She doesn't know. A pause, then quieter. No, she won't figure it out. My stomach dropped, not slowly, all at once. I stepped into the room, and just like that, he ended the call, too quickly, too clean. Who was that? I asked, casual, like it didn't matter. Work, he said immediately. No hesitation, no explanation, just one word. And a look that said the conversation was over. But something had already shifted. Because in that moment, I knew. Not what exactly, but enough to understand this wasn't normal. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I checked his jacket, and there it was, folded neatly in the inner pocket, a receipt from a hotel, 2 guests, on 1 room, 3 nights, dated just 4 days earlier. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to make it make sense, trying to come up with any explanation that didn't feel like the obvious one. Because cheating? That I could understand, that I could process, that I could explain to people. But something about this felt different, colder, more deliberate. And right then, standing there alone in the dim light, I realized something that didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt worse. I wasn't losing him. I never actually had him. And that was the moment. Everything started to unravel. That would have been simple. Painful, sure. Embarrassing, definitely. But simple. You find out. You confront them. It ends. People understand that story. But this wasn't that kind of story. After I found the receipt, I didn't confront Daniel. Not right away. And here's why. Something about the way he said she doesn't know kept replaying in my head. Over and over. Because that's not how people talk when they're just having an affair. That's how people talk when they're hiding something bigger. So instead of reacting, I paid attention. The next few days, I watched everything. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the things he didn't say. And once you start looking closely, you notice things you missed before, like his spending. It wasn't just dinners or hotels. There were charges that didn't make sense. Large ones. Transfers. Payments to accounts I didn't recognize. At first, I thought, maybe debt? maybe gambling. But then I saw something that didn't fit either of those. Legal fees, not one, multiple, from different firms. I now ask yourself, why would someone secretly pay multiple legal offices and not mention it to their wife? That's when the feeling changed. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was direction. So I made a decision. I followed him. It wasn't dramatic. No disguise, no plan. Just me, sitting in my car, hands gripping the wheel tighter than I realized. Watching him leave work, watching him drive. And here's the part that didn't make sense. He didn't go to a hotel, didn't go to a restaurant, didn't meet anyone publicly. He pulled up to a small office building. Plain, almost forgettable, the kind of place you wouldn't look at twice. He went inside, and I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. My heart was already pounding before I even got out of the car, because deep down, I knew. And whatever I was about to find was going to be worse than cheating. The front door wasn't locked. That was the first mistake. Inside, the hallway was quiet, dim lighting, closed doors. But one room at the end, light spilling out, voices. I moved closer, slowly, carefully, and then I heard it. "She's perfect for it," a woman's voice, sharp, professional. Another voice responded, male, calm, measured. "We just need her signature." My chest tightened. Then, Daniel. "She won't question it," he said, "so long as we time it right." I stopped breathing because they weren't talking about someone random. They were talking about me. Words started slipping through the door more clearly now. Fragments, pieces, enough to build something terrifying. Liability, transfer, ownership, my name, on paper. I spread across the table inside that room. I leaned just enough to see through the glass panel. And there it was. Documents, stacks of them, highlighted sections, signatures, my signature, copied, practiced, prepared. My hands started shaking, not from fear alone, but from realization. This wasn't betrayal. This was planning. And I wasn't just in his life. I was part of something he was building. Something calculated. Something dangerous. I pulled out my phone, took pictures, one after another. Quick, silent, proof. Because instinct kicked in at that moment. Not panic, not emotion, strategy. But then, a sound. The chair inside scraped against the floor. Footsteps, closer, and before I could move, the door opened. Daniel stepped out. And just like that, everything stopped. His eyes locked onto mine. No confusion, no surprise, just recognition, a pause. 1 second, maybe 2. And then he spoke. Quietly, controlled. "How long have you been standing there?" And in that moment, I realized something even worse than everything I'd already seen. He wasn't afraid. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the documents, not the signatures, not even the fact that my entire life had just been reduced to paperwork on a table. It was his face. Calm, steady, almost curious, like I was just another variable he needed to account for. "So, let me ask you, what do you do when the person who's supposed to panic doesn't?" I should have reacted. Raised my voice, demanded answers, made a scene. That's what anyone would expect. That's what he was probably prepared for. But I didn't. I tilted my head slightly and forced my expression into something neutral, almost confused. "I was looking for you," I said. Simple, harmless, believable. And for the first time, there it was. A flicker. Not fear, but recalculation. Because now, he didn't know what I knew. He studied me for a second longer than necessary, then stepped aside, subtly blocking the view into the room behind him. "Work ran late," he said, smooth, effortless, like he'd rehearsed that sentence 100 times. I nodded slowly, let the silence stretch just enough to feel natural. Then, "Can we go home?" I asked, and just like that, I gave him exactly what he wanted. Normal. The drive back was quiet, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight, awareness. 2 people sitting side by side, both pretending nothing had changed, but everything had. And that night, I didn't confront him. I didn't mention the office, didn't mention the documents. didn't mention my name written in places it should never have been. Instead, I started preparing. Because here's the truth no one tells you. When you realize someone is planning something against you, you don't react emotionally. You survive strategically. The next morning, I went to work like usual, sat at my desk, opened files, smiled when people spoke to me. But behind that, I was building something. As an archivist, I had access, not unlimited, but enough. Legal records, filing systems, historical documentation, and more importantly, I knew how to look for things people thought were buried. Within days, I started finding connections, names, transactions, patterns. Daniel wasn't just moving money. He was positioning it, layering it, shifting ownership through legal gray areas until everything pointed somewhere else, to me. Debts that weren't mine, liabilities I never agreed to, structures designed so that if anything collapsed, I would be the one underneath it. But he made one mistake. He assumed I wouldn't understand it. So I did something he never expected. I asked for help. Quietly, carefully, through someone who owed me a favor, a legal advisor who didn't ask unnecessary questions. And when I showed him the copies, the photos, the patterns, he didn't hesitate. "This isn't just unethical," he said. "This is deliberate." That word again. Deliberate. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A plan. And suddenly, everything became clear. The distance, the secrecy, the timing, and he wasn't drifting away from me. He was setting me up. So I made a decision right then. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't warn him. I would let him think he was still in control. And then I would take that control away, piece by piece. The divorce? That was just the surface. Quiet, clean, exactly how he wanted it. But underneath that, I was collecting everything, every document, every signature, every inconsistency he thought no one would catch, including one thing he believed no longer existed. An original document, signed, dated, and very, very real. The kind of document that doesn't just suggest intent, it proves it. And now, sitting at that dinner table, with my family laughing, with my mother tearing into me like I was the failure, that document was sitting right in front of her, unwrapped or exposed. And as her eyes scanned the page, line by line, word by word, I watched something I had never seen before. Not anger, not judgment, fear. Her lips parted slightly, her fingers tightened around the paper. "Emily," she whispered, "what is this?" And for the first time that night, the room wasn't laughing anymore. The question didn't sound like my mother. It was quieter, thinner, like something underneath her confidence had just cracked. I didn't rush to answer, didn't reach for the paper, didn't fill the silence. Because now, silence was doing the work for me. "Read it," I said calmly. Diane's eyes dropped back to the document. Her lips moved slightly as she scanned the lines again, slower this time, more carefully. And across the table, the energy had completely shifted. Lila wasn't smiling anymore. Ryan leaned forward just a little, his attention locked in. Dad had finally stopped pretending to focus on his plate. "What am I looking at?" Lila asked, her voice tighter now. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and finally, I spoke. "It's a transfer agreement," I said. "Drafted 3 months before my divorce." Diane's head snapped up. "Transfer of what?" "Liability," I answered. The word landed heavier than anything she had said earlier. I let that sit for a moment, then continued. "Daniel was moving financial responsibility into my name, debt, legal exposure, everything tied to a series of transactions that weren't exactly clean." Dad frowned. "What do you mean, not clean?" I met his eyes. "Fraud?" I said simply. That word didn't echo like Diane's had earlier. It dropped. Heavy. Final. Lila let out a short, disbelieving breath. "That doesn't make any sense. Why would he—" "Because I was the safest place to put it," I cut in. Now I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, just precise. I had no history, no reason to be investigated, no reason for anyone to question anything tied to my name. I glanced at Diane. And more importantly, I had a family that would assume any problem was my fault. That hit. You could see it land. Diane's grip tightened on the paper. That's not, Emily, that's not what this is saying. It is, I replied evenly. You're just reading it like someone who trusts him. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of realization. Ryan spoke next. Careful, analytical. Wait, are you saying he planned this? Like, intentionally? I nodded once. Yes, no hesitation. No emotion in the delivery. Just truth. I overheard him. I saw the documents. I copied everything before I left. Lila shook her head slowly, trying to catch up. And you didn't say anything? You just left? I filed for divorce, I said, quietly. And then? Dad asked. And that's where everything fully shifted. I reported it. That sentence changed the room. Completely. Diane blinked. You what? I took everything I had, documents, records, copies of signatures, and handed it over to someone who knew exactly what to do with it. I tilted my head slightly, watched her process it. There's an investigation now, I added. No one spoke. Because now, for the first time, the story they had been telling themselves didn't exist anymore. He could go to prison, Lila said quietly. I didn't answer right away. And then, yes, another silence. Longer this time. And then Diane, still staring at the paper, said something that almost sounded like she was trying to hold on to control. Why didn't you tell us? I let out a small breath, not frustrated, not emotional, just honest. You didn't ask. That was it. No raised voice, no accusation, just a fact. And somehow, that landed harder than anything else I had said, because it wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about them. All the assumptions, all the dismissals, all the times they decided who I was, without ever actually looking. Diane slowly set the paper down, carefully, like it had weight now. I didn't know, she said, quieter than I'd ever heard her. I know, I replied, and I meant it, because she didn't know. She just never tried to. Across the table, Ryan leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable now, but different. More aware. Lila looked unsettled, like something in her perfectly structured world had just shifted out of place. Dad? He looked down again, but this time it didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like regret. And me? I felt clear, not victorious, not angry, not even relieved in a dramatic way. Just done. The narrative they had built about me, gone. Not because I argued, not because I defended myself, but because I didn't need to. The truth did that on its own. A few minutes passed in quiet conversation after that. Smaller questions, careful ones. What happens now? Dad eventually asked. I stood slowly, reaching for my bag. The investigation continues, I said. I've already given my statement. If they need more, I'll cooperate. And him? Lila asked. I paused for just a second. He made his decisions, I said. Now he deals with them. Simple. Final. Diane looked like she wanted to say something else, and for a moment, I thought she might. Emily, she started. I turned toward her, waited, but whatever she was going to say didn't come out the way she expected. I didn't understand. I gave a small nod. No, I said. You didn't. No anger, no forgiveness speech, no dramatic resolution, just truth. I picked up my bag, slipped it over my shoulder, and then I walked toward the door. No one stopped me, because there was nothing left to stop. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, quieter. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the faint glow of streetlights stretching ahead. And for the first time in a long time, there was no noise in my head. No second guessing, no explaining, just clarity. They thought I lost something. A marriage, a future, a version of success they understood. But standing there, alone, I knew the truth. I hadn't lost anything. I had seen something for what it was, before it could destroy me. and I walked away with everything that mattered. I adjusted the strap of my bag slightly, took one step forward, then another. No rush, no hesitation. Just forward,